When you think about gut health, you probably think about bloating or farting, going to the toilet more often. This is true, but it's not the full story. It affects your digestive system, but it affects your physical health as well. Your immune system, your mental health, meaning your concentration, your focus, your mood. This means if we want to live healthier lives, then we need to involve our guts, and we need to do things for our gut and avoid certain things for our gut as well. So this video is on the 5 things to avoid to improve gut health. Before we jump into that, what is the gut? What is the GI tract? So the gut, or the GI tract, is short for gastrointestinal tract. This is the long tube that starts at the mouth, ends at the anus, where we poop from. The main role of the gut is to break down the food we eat, to absorb nutrients, and to get rid of waste. But it's not just that, because the gut is home to something called the gut microbiome. What is that, you might wonder? The gut is home to trillions of bacteria and other microorganisms that help break down the food that we eat, transform them into nutrients that our body needs. So the gut microbiome, trillions of bacteria. So more of them than there are cells in your body. Think about that for a moment. So when we eat various foods, let's take fruits and veggies as an example. It goes through the gut, through to the colon, where it's fermented by these microorganisms. Gas is then produced, but what's important is that it produces metabolites that interact with our body as well. So let's get into the 5 things to avoid to improve our gut health. Now, it's not necessarily to avoid them, but rather to limit them, because completely avoiding them is sometimes difficult to do, even though you should try to do so, to try and strive for it. So tip number 1, what is that? Tip number 1 is to avoid or cut down on red meat. So you can often associate red meat with building muscles, protein, that kind of thing. You've heard of red meat fad diets, so only eat red meat, carnivore diet, that kind of thing. Famous people do it as well. But if we look at the scientific evidence behind it, it turns out that too much red meat isn't exactly great for our gut health. So the main reason for this is that the metabolites from red meat are associated with a higher risk of cardiovascular disease and other health things like cancer. So if you actually go into the World Cancer Research Fund, they say that you should only be having 3 portions of red meat per week, and that's 500 grams total. So think about that for a moment and how much red meat you are eating in comparison. So we need to be eating 350 to 500 grams per week. Otherwise, we're putting ourselves at increased risk of things like bowel cancer. So let's get into tip number 2. Tip number 2 is to avoid artificial sweeteners and sugars. So this is kind of annoying because a lot of people consume it without even noticing. So you could be drinking a Coke, a Diet Coke, fizzy drinks, all that kind of stuff, but it's not good for our healths. Consuming so much sugar is not a good thing because it gets our body ready and primed for all this sugar. It actually makes our body more receptive to it. So it increases our insulin production, for example, which makes us ultimately even hungrier and gain more weight and impact our general health in a negative way. The other thing about it is that it messes up our circadian rhythms. We really shouldn't be consuming so much sugar in vast quantities in foods you may not even realize have so much sugar inside it. So now let's jump into tip number 3. So tip number 3 kind of relates to it. It's to avoid processed food. So this is anything that comes in these packets, chips, sausages, bread, all that kind of stuff in these packages. They have a lot of additives and preservatives, and this is absolutely terrible. This is probably one of the things I would completely avoid, not just limit, but completely avoid. Don't get this mistaken, because a lot of foods are processed, but when we start adding these additives and preservatives, they turn into that kind of more processed range and ultra processed range, and that's the stuff to really avoid, because that's so detrimental. So effectively what happens is the good bacteria gets stunted. So you stop the good bacteria from growing in your gut because the preservatives generally inhibit these bacteria. So take emulsifiers, for example. So this is found in loads of processed food, even foods you may not think have it. So such as plant-based milks and things like that. So that's something that gets pushed a little bit, but they have emulsifiers as well. They disrupt the lining of your bowel. So that mucus layer in the bowel, the tight junctions in your bowel, the cell wall. It's very bad because it promotes inflammation, not just in your gut, but then throughout the rest of the body. It can predispose you to autoimmune conditions, for example. So perhaps it's not a coincidence that children born to immigrants to a Western country who immediately adopt such a diet of processed food and sugar, they turn into having these autoimmune conditions that their grandparents, for example, never had. So these are things that we need to really think about, especially in today's age when the cost of living is high and inflation and things like that. It may not be always the easiest choice, but we really should be looking at the back of labels and throwing away that garbage processed food and not consuming it. So tip number 4 is to avoid diet fads and detoxes. So you can see on social media all these gurus and things like that that recommend having a juice cleanse or something like that. So really strict diets are generally not that great because you limit yourself in the amount of nutrients you put into your body and you add stress onto your body. So there are certain cases where you really do need a really strict diet. So for example, people who need exclusive gluten-free diets, they have celiac disease, but that is a very rare condition that not a lot of people in the world have, and it's a rare condition. So if you don't fall under that category, you shouldn't be limiting yourself to a gluten-free diet, maybe reducing the amount of gluten and things like that, but not completely eliminating it from the diet. There's no real great benefit to that, and if anything, you could put yourself at a little bit more risk. Leave a comment in the section below if you disagree with that. And then tip number 5 is to avoid counting calories. So if you're trying to lose weight or gain muscle and that kind of thing, sometimes you can be really strict about the calories you consume, but sometimes that doesn't say the whole story. So you can get a McDonald's meal that has the same amount of calories as a meal you cook at home with chicken and vegetables and salad, but the nutritional value isn't exactly the same there. So don't so much obsess about counting the calories, but rather focus on the actual quality of the food itself and what you're putting into your body. Now, there's no harm in counting calories, but just be mindful of what you need to do in terms of putting the food in your body and the nutritional value of the food that you're consuming. And finally, a bonus tip is another thing to avoid to improve your gut health, and that is to stress less. So that's one of the pillars of a healthy lifestyle, is to manage your stress. We made a video in the last video about how stress impacts your gut in a negative way. So if you manage your stress, then that will go a long way in terms of the gut microbiome, the gut-brain axis, and all of these things. Please check out that other video regarding that topic. Like and subscribe for more. Leave me your thoughts in the comment section below, and we'll see you in the next video.